Hello and good evening, everybody. It's your girl, True Lewis, and I'm going to be co hosting this episode tonight. It's all about your HBCUs. So, we are so glad to have you. We see you all there in the chat room. And now I'm going to turn that mic over to your host, Nika Smith.
Hello, True. How are you?
I'm fine, baby girl.
Good, good, good. Well, we thank you all so much for taking time out of your evening to join us for this week's episode of BlackProGen Live. And let's go ahead and flip to the next slide, James. Tonight's topic: historically Black schools, colleges, and universities have been the bedrock of the African American community since their inception. For that reason alone, they are genealogical gold mines. In this episode tonight, we'll talk about how to uncover connections to these institutions, how to research your family members who attended them, and more. So thanks so much for joining us for technically the 67th episode of BlackProGen Live. It's not in sequential order, well, because we had to reschedule it. So thanks so much for joining us. Next slide, please. All right. If you have a question or comment, join the conversation now. Participate in the live chat on YouTube to the top right hand of the screen if you're watching on a computer, and at the bottom of the YouTube app on your mobile device. Also, feel free to weigh in on Twitter by tweeting us at BlackProGen or using the hashtag BlackProGen. Next slide. All right. Let's see. And also, here's a reminder for you to set reminders. All you need to do is set them at my YouTube page by clicking set reminder under the episodes you're interested in, or you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live. And James, I'm not seeing any of the slides, and maybe that's just me.
Everyone should be seeing them. You're not seeing them?
I just want to do a double check. The rest of the panel, do you see the slides? I see your screen. Can you go to present mode and go to present to everyone?
Wait, hold on. I had it on there, and then
yes, that's what it needs to be on. But it's just a blank screen. Okay, now do presenter view.
Let me do it again. Sorry about that. Stop presenting. Present to everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys see him?
Yeah, we see him. Okay. It's not the full screen, but okay, that's fine.
I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I don't know why, but hey, we're moving forward. Okay.
No problem.
All right, next screen. All right, so we've got, actually, we'll just go forward because we have a guest tonight. I'm going to go ahead and read his bio to you. All right, so Dr. Lopez Matthews Jr. is a digital production librarian and the manager of the Digital Production Center at the Howard University Libraries and the Moreland Spingarn Research Center. He holds a degree in history from Coppin State University and a master's degree from, Howard University. Nope. I'm sorry, I skipped a line, my bad. A master's degree in public history and archival administration and a PhD in United States history from Howard University. Currently, he is the commissioner on the Maryland State Commission on African American History and Culture and a member of the board of directors of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture. He is also a member of the advisory board for the Center for Digital Excellence at the University of the West Indies, Mona. So that's our guest tonight. Dr. Lewis, I'm calling Dr. Lewis because I'm looking at True. Dr. Matthews, come off the mute.
That's not my pay grade.
Hello.
All right, James, come on back. All right, so we're going to get started with the conversation for this evening, which is all about historically Black colleges and universities. And James, if you can do me a favor and double click off of Dr. Lopez, because the screen is not going to shift back and forth between people. I just want to make sure you know that.
I did.
Okay, just want to make sure you know that. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get into the conversation, right? This is a big, lofty topic. We're talking about historically Black colleges, universities. They are the bedrock of the Black community. I grew up hearing about Tuskegee, Southern, all sorts of stuff, right? And I forgot to introduce the rest of the panel because we got Dr. Lopez, and I know the panel wants to show off their t-shirts because there are several historically Black college university t-shirts that are being featured tonight, including Dr. Lopez's Howard University shirt. which is prominently featured. True, would you like to represent your crew?
Yay! I'm here representing Tuskegee University. All the way
With,
from
with
Kentucky.
the pom-pom.
Yes, we're gonna ball and parlay this episode.
All right, just to break up the Howard University a little bit, Bernice, go ahead and give your alma mater a shout out.
Grambling. I know it looks kind of backwards here, but it's Grambling, folks.
No, it's right way forward. I don't know
Okay.
where Lil Willie went, but him at Xavier University would be prominently featured. All right, James, go ahead with Howard.
There's Willie. He's getting ready to jump up. Oh,
Yay! Our college baby.
Oh my gosh, Willie's there from Xavier. All right, go ahead, Howard University. Again.
HU? You know. Wait, Lopez, you're supposed to have your microphone off so we can do the, it's okay. Howard University's in the house. Boom. And I got the degree up there on the bookshelf, but
you know what? We don't need to see the degree. We know you got it because how you represent.
But do you see the book though? Do you see the book?
Okay.
Boom.
Okay, the book is prominently featured. Angela, I'm not a HBCU alumni, which is why I'm wearing a black and brilliant T-shirt tonight. But Angela, would you like to rep any HBCU that you have a connection to at all?
I will certainly give a shout out to people at Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas, and of course my other home state of Oklahoma. So I have to mention Langston, the farthest west of the HBCUs.
Mm. Don't you just love how Angela comes on? She's so authoritative and just very soothing. And did you know that Langston she's got a great talking voice. All right. Moving forward, first question of the evening. What's the history of historically Black schools, colleges, and universities? And I have to admit that people are like, well, that's not right. It's HBCUs. No, we're talking about schools too, right? Because we have to remember that it didn't just start on the university level, that you have to think about things like Rosenwald schools, Black schools that were established. A lot of folks that I know come from the church school or the Baptist Association school that was of the community. People had to fund it. They had to do all sorts of things. So let's talk about the history of these institutions. And don't all jump in at one time.
Well, the oldest one, of course, we know is Lincoln University, established in 1864 in really outside of Oxford, Pennsylvania, I don't know if it's a rural community. But of course, within a decade, there were quite a few that were scattered throughout the country, and one of which, some don't exist anymore, one of which has a unique history, as they all do, one of which, though I like to mention because it was built at the end of the Civil War in Arkansas on the banks of the Mississippi River in West Helena, Arkansas, and the people who actually built that school were soldiers of the 56th United States Colored Infantry, most of whom were men, sons of Missouri, but they were in this Arkansas established Union regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops. But of course, within that first decade, between 1864, when Lincoln was established, of course, there were several dozen within the first decade and a half. And of course, I'm sure there are people here who know the history of their own institutions and alma mater as well.
Well, I think it's funny, Angela, because so some folks would debate which HBCU is the first one. I'll let the good doctor speak to that. But some folks would debate that one, as I'm sure you would know. But yeah, I think that the schools are very important in general, whether it's at the college level or not. Partially because people seem to think that because you had these laws that prevented our ancestors from being able to read and to write, that somehow that means that they didn't have a respect for education. No, we came here with that, and I think it's important that we recognize that. We know we're talking about when we talk about the American context, but to recognize that they also had schools and institutions of learning before they even got on the boats, and that a respect for education was something that we already had. No one had to tell us that you need to know how to read, write, and count. No one had to tell us that, even if someone else was preventing us from do that.
Yes, I want to just give you just a brief history of what I'm looking at in one of my books, Grambling State University. And in this book, it states that it was born out of desperation, determination, and desire. A group of concerned citizens organized as the Farmers Relief Association, desperate to free themselves of the lowly circumstances they were in, determined to do something about it. And so they expressed this desire to Booker T. Washington of Tuskegee Institute. And Dr. Washington sent to the area in Louisiana a young graduate of Tuskegee named Charles P. Adams. And he came to the territory with little more than his school credentials. And this was on August 4th, 1901. This is the beginning of Grambling.
Okay, so for Xavier, it was actually it started out as a high school, and it was built by Catherine Drexel. She realized, if she was actually a nun, she realized that there was no schools, no Catholic schools around for African Americans and Native Americans. So she decided to build a school that focused on educating them. And she got the money. It was actually an inheritance from her father, who was a wealthy banker, and he had all daughters. And so what he did was he had his money set up for each child, but they each had to give the money to the next generation. And Catherine didn't have any children, so she put all the money that she could before she died into the school, in building the school. And that's some of the history of here.
Anybody else want to chime in? Dr. Matthews?
Well, I guess I'll talk about Howard. Howard was, of course, founded in Washington, D.C. by members of the First Congregational Church. It was founded as a university. So there is some confusion about what Howard was when it was first founded, because Rayford Logan mentions in his book that the idea was to found a school for preachers. And then they said, oh, we want to found a school for teachers. They said, oh, we'll do a school for teachers and preachers. But when they started the school, they realized that they wanted to start a university. They realized that African Americans needed a comprehensive education after slavery. And they wanted to do it in the nation's capital, a truly national university. So that's, and they named it after General Oliver Otis Howard, who was a member of the church, and he was the head of the Freedmen's Bureau. So he helped use Freedmen's Bureau money to help build the school in Washington, D.C., help purchase the land, help build the first buildings. He put the Freedmen's Hospital on the campus so that, it's kind of sharing of the Freedmen's Bureau money to support the school. So,
Dr. Matthews, what's the Freedmen's Hospital now? I'm just curious about that.
The Freedmen's Hospital is this Kathy Hughes School of Communications.
That's right. I forgot. That's where I went.
So it is still there, and they still hold classes in the building. It's a little interesting to navigate because it wasn't built as a classroom building, the hospital. So there are different wings. So if you go up the wrong stairs, you'll realize, oh wait, I can't get to another part of the building. I have to go back the way I came, to go down the hall, to go up another set of stairs. So, interesting.
This sounds like a fun house.
Go in the basement and you'll feel like you are in a fun house.
Well, no, James,
happening?
James, you did tell me that on my tour of Howard University. You did
That
tell
I
me
did.
about that.
That I did. Yep.
Oh my gosh. All right. So second question I have for tonight is, what's the value to genealogists to research within historically Black schools, colleges, and universities?
Well, I would say that the value is in the fact that most African Americans attended. Those who attended college, they went to HBCU. So you can find out about your relatives and what they've done and where they've come from. For instance, we digitized our military collection, and we had photographs, and a woman found her grandfather and she contacted us. And so we showed her where he was in the Hilltop because he received an award from his fraternity and he was very active on campus. So she got to learn a lot about her grandfather, who passed away when her father was 13. She got to learn a lot about him and share that with her father because she saw his picture and she said, oh, he went to Howard. So let me look him up. And so you can learn a lot about who your ancestors were by going through those records, because that's where they were educated. That's where they may have worked. And so that's really the value of the HBCU. Now at Howard, we have the Moreland Springer Research Center. And so we have organizational records as well. And so that can really help with your genealogical research because your family member may have been involved with one of these organizations.
Anyone else? What value is it to research at historically Black colleges and universities and schools, really?
You know, it's just amazing when you start looking at the historically Black universities, the wealth of information you can obtain just regarding the community where the school was established. That gives you insight into what was going on at that particular time. If you're from the South, clearly you understand that most of the institutions, all of the institutions were segregated. So as an African American, this really gives you an opportunity to see how much the community valued education. So it was very, very strong. And so when you look at the old yearbooks, you find out the key people that came to the universities. I mean, I started looking in my own yearbook and saw that Dr. Benjamin Mays was there. We had Nikki Giovanni. We had Martin Luther King wasn't there when I was there, but certainly there were very prominent politicians, Black politicians that came on campus, and the pictures are there where we're shaking hands. And so you just get a broad understanding of how socially conscious those historically Black universities were and what they meant to the African American community.
One of the questions from the chat room is, what specific records should we be asking for? Like, what's even available?
Doesn't that vary, I guess, from school to school in terms of their archival holdings? I know that some schools are quite accessible. Some have started digitizing old yearbooks. Not only that, but different types of newsletters and organizational publications. And some schools haven't done that at all. I don't know if there is a movement afoot generally across the board with other HBCUs, but I was delighted, for example, to see some of my ancestors listed in not photographs because they graduated so early, but to see them listed among alumni at MARIAH Medical College in Nashville. And my great-grandfather's brother graduated from there in 1878. That was the second class at MARIAH. And thankfully, they have put some of their old yearbooks and other publications online. And so they're being digitized. But I don't know if across the board, if all of them are that accessible or not. I would assume that it can vary from school to school.
Now, I have seen some of the yearbooks at the Allen County Public Library.
Oh, great.
Yes, yes. And so that's one place where individuals may want to go, or at least to check to see if they have the holdings, because alumni and others may have sent their yearbooks to Allen County, or there may be someone that's collecting them, but I've actually seen them on the shelf.
I think one of the things that we tend to forget to do as well is to use what we all use probably every day. Use the census and go, if you're looking at 1900, 1910, the pupils in attendance at the schools are often listed, particularly if they stayed in a college residence hall. you will see pupil. You'll see so many institutions that are there, and it's a delight. And we forget to really look for those colleges and look for the enumeration of students at the schools. And in many cases, you will find them. So especially in those first, I'll say, 3 decades of 20th century records, you're going to find a lot of them listed and who were enumerated. They were there at the time, and they were enumerated among the student population. So we need to use that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny you mentioned that, Angela, because I actually the 2000. If you're looking for me in New Jersey in the 2010 census, you won't find me. Why? Because I was in undergrad at Howard at that time. So that's actually a very good lesson. One thing I will say too about the records of HBCUs is that I don't think we should underestimate the power of some of the student publications and student-run newspapers. I know recently Howard has pushed to digitize the Hilltop, which is a student-run newspaper. And I mean, some of the stories that you will find in there, particularly, especially from like the civil rights and Black Power eras, are things that if you're looking for a grandparent or in the future great-great-grandparent or whatever, you'll find a lot of photos and amazing details that really you won't find those type of that type of information anywhere else about individuals. And even if it's not something pertaining to a specific relative, if you know that they were there during that particular time and place, again, using myself as an example, I was a student at Howard when Barack Obama was elected president. I was in my sophomore year. So even knowing that about me, if you were a descendant of mine, that would be something that you would say, did Grandpa James go and visit, when the night of his election, where was he? What was he doing? These are the type of questions that you might ask of someone who's in school, especially given around a historic event like that, or anything else, the freedom rides or any other type of events you can think of. So it's important, I think, that to think outside the box with those type of things, especially with student movements and war and other things.
I was just about to say that's probably something that we should definitely talk about, especially when you're thinking about institutions and places like Mississippi. Like Tougaloo College was very instrumental in a lot of stuff with the civil rights movement. A number of different schools and really colleges and universities. Fisk, right, in Nashville. Very huge part of that. So if you're looking for involvement in that type of activity, you're definitely going to check the student newspaper, because they're going to be reporting out on what happened on campus. You would also look at national coverage, because those sit-ins and those things that were orchestrated by college students, that was hitting national news. But the other thing to consider is, we talked about organizations on campus. What were people doing on campus? The other thing I would also look into is see if you can find a catalog of classes and what was required to complete certain degrees or certificates, because the changes of the degrees have changed over time. When my uncles went to Tuskegee, it was really considered like a trade school. So they they were trained in masonry and carpentry and plastery and things like that. Not like the degrees that we're getting now. It was different. It was vocational. It was, they only went to school up to the 9th grade. And then they, if they had the ability, they would then go to an educational institution like a Tuskegee, or later on down the line they were going to Southern, or they were going to Grambling, or wherever else. But the degree programs were different than they are now, and I think that's there. We should also call out to folks that they should pay attention to that as well.
Right.
Is there anything you wanted to add, Dr. Lopez, to the conversation?
I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, the student publications are most definitely a great source for finding out genealogical information. Like James mentioned, we just put the Hilltop up. It's now searchable. So people are finding all kinds of things. It's just searching through the Hilltop. Aretha Franklin just passed away. So you're like, oh, when did Aretha Franklin come to campus? Was she ever on campus? So they did the search of the Hilltop, and they found out the several times that she came to campus. So you can find out good things and bad things looking at the HBCUs when you're looking at your relatives. I had back when I was an archivist in the university archives, a woman called up wanting information about her grandfather, who was the town doctor. And he came back and he said that he attended Howard University and he was the town doctor. And we looked up and tried to find his information. We discovered that he did attend Howard University, but he never actually finished his degree. So he was not awarded a medical degree from Howard, but he had attended Howard. He just went back home and told everyone that he got his degree and he was now the town doctor. So yeah, you found some good things.
And I bet he was a good town doctor too. Best that they could get. You know, I want to just mention the need to look into the various alumni directories. And because these alumni directories also provide you with a full profile of individuals that attended. They give the names of the school. They tell if there's a woman who was not married and she did sign up to get the directory, her married name and maiden name is included in the directory. But the best part of it is telling you what degree, where they studied, and where they're currently living. So if you have an opportunity to pull up an alumni directory to find out where your ancestors are, this is a great source for individuals.
And Nika, real quick, I want to make sure, because you gave me an idea when you mentioned about the catalog of classes. I think it's important that we also look at who are the professors and administrators at a school when a given relative that you're searching for, when they were there. So especially, if you know that you have a relative that ended up becoming a successful lawyer or became the town doctor, you want to know who was it that trained them academically, and who were their professional and personal mentors, maybe, because you never know. Especially some of these schools produce some of the finest scholars in the world on their faculty, and they may actually have interacted with and trained your relative. So I think that's very important, especially when you're dealing with things like ministry, law, medicine. I mean, those are things that are really going to impact a person's career trajectory. Also, I'll turn it back to you, Nika.
I think Angela's going to have something to say.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we also don't think about, but it certainly was until I'll say about the 1930s, maybe by 1940s, about the institutions historically Black colleges and universities. They also had preparatory schools. Many people are totally oblivious to the fact that many of the schools, from all over the country, they had really, I'll say, a college preparatory program. These were boarding schools. And in fact, if you look at some early Black publications around the 1920s, 1930s, even the 1940s, in the backs of those publications, you see advertisements directed to the readership. Case in point, the Crisis magazine. And you'll see advertisements from North Carolina A&T, Holly Springs. You'll see advertisements, Tuskegee, for people to send their children to preparatory school at these colleges. And many people are totally unaware of the fact that for some schools, these were feeder schools for them. Graduate, get your secondary school education, and continue on to the college. For others, it was a chance to get a good foundation, a good preparatory education, whether or not they matriculated at that particular institution. And we really need to think about that. Now, I guess the question might be to an archivist, where are those records? Are they available, the school rosters? Is that something, trust me, the inquiring public would love to be able to see an ancestor's name on a school roster at a preparatory school for Fisk or Howard or wherever. Are those available? Or are they just sort of in the vaults? And what can be done to rally archivists to pull them out and get them digitized?
So I will tell you that will probably never happen.
And why?
Of privacy concerns.
They're all dead.
Maintained by the registrar's office. Like at Howard, all of our student records are maintained by the registrar's office.
I get that, but I'm talking almost 100 years ago.
I know, but don't see that as, okay, we're going to just let student information out. They're very protective of student information. And so you might get the directory, but the actual like student records and transcripts and all that.
No. We're not asking for transcripts. We're genealogists. We want evidence that our people were there. And that's no different than putting a yearbook at Allen County. We're thrilled to see that evidence and a photo. And as genealogists, we're not asking for private information, who got a D or who didn't, pass organic chemistry. The fact of a school roster, school census record. I know some institutions will call them a census, which is really their register. I guess the registrar's report in terms of who attended. That's what we as genealogists are interested in, not the private information.
But, my mother went to Grady School of Nursing. And right now, those records are there. And she told me, get everything. She wants me to get everything on her. And so I did write to Grady under the Freedom of Information Act to request her. I want her entire transcript because she told me some things that I want to see if it's written in her record. And she passed away, but had pictures of the nursing students. And so I think that this is very important for us to at least try to get that information. I mean, we're talking about something that happened, 100 years ago. And so I can't see privacy being an issue for
Absolutely not.
most of the people that are gone.
It's Social Security.
It's genealogy that we want.
Exactly.
I mean, anytime you can get your Social Security, you certainly
Right.
can get that. I mean, stuff hits the newspaper the next day after you pass away, and your privacy is gone.
Well, we have to distinguish between current and what we would consider recent students and historical students.
Historical, yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I was going to say there's got to be a gap between the two, and each university is going to have a different policy as to what is available and what isn't. You know how certain things it's got to turn 75 years. It may also depend on the state, right? Like maybe the state policy is 75 years for death certificates or whatever. It may be dictated by state law, but you would have to you would only know that unless you contacted somebody there. And speaking of this, I think we need to have a conversation about privacy though, regarding what researchers ask for, what they're allowed to ask for, and privacy things that we should be concerned about when doing research at these institutions. Should we be concerned about privacy? I mean, that came up a little bit just now, but is there any other layer to this that we're not considering?
Well, I know when we used to work in admissions, I used to work in college admissions at Boston College and at Tufts University, and then also in graduate admissions. One of the things we did, particularly at BC and also at Tufts, once a student matriculated, and the student actually matriculated at the university, other than their initial application and the decision to admit that student, everything else that would be subjective data, meaning letters of recommendation, even the student's personal essay, all of that information was shredded. The record, the initial application form that the student completed is always preserved with their signature. And of course, the letter, the decision of the committee to admit that student. Even the high school transcript is shredded because we're not the owner of the transcript. The institution is not. So that sort of private information that people might be worried about from a college admissions perspective, most universities protect themselves and keep a record. Just, yes, this person was here was their application, they were matriculated. Transcripts, of course not, absolutely should be protected. And that would not be something that from a genealogical perspective we would want. But from, certainly, and universities do protect themselves and the students' privacy. But in terms of looking at a person, I had a great uncle who attended Arkansas A&M, Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal College in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, now known as University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. But he attended that school in the turn of the century. Would love to see his name on a roster. And I'd also like to know if some of my other cousins who were his contemporaries attended as well. And especially those of us who do community history. it's a wonderful opportunity to take a look and say, wow, look at some of these movers and shakers in this little rural community in Southwest Arkansas who were also there. And I'm sure James would eat up some of that stuff because he would recognize some people in certainly and the Masonic organizations who later on, maybe 40 years later, became leaders. But I think it's just wonderful information. And I hope that that is something, especially if we're talking 100 years ago or, 85 years ago. That's what we're speaking about.
So I wanted to chime in just because people are still continuing to ask and wonder how do you get to these records? It's going to be specific to the particular institution, especially for those that are no longer open. If they folded in with another college, because remember, think for example, there was Clark College, right? And then there was Atlanta University. Those two merged together to become Clark Atlanta. So you would need to do research to find out which records are, where all the records went. Were they destroyed? The other thing is, was a school ever burned? Was there ever a natural disaster, right? That could affect whether or not records are available or not. But each school is different. Just as we tell people, there is no centralized repository to research slaves in the United States. There is no centralized repository that gives you every single student record that has ever been created at every single HBCU or school. That does not exist. Now, if you're thinking about Rosenwald Schools, there is a directory that has been established by, I think it's Fisk has that. There's a little website and it's not, it doesn't have a bunch of bells and whistles. But there is a directory of Rosenwald Schools. Those were founded and were Black schools that were across the country. You can locate that. James, what are you going to say? Because you have your hand up like you want to interrupt.
Oh, I was going to ask what's the Rosenwald School? I think you were kind of getting into that.
Angela, go ahead.
Julius Rosenwald was a philanthropist, and he set aside, and I don't know the exact figure that he set aside for the education of students, primarily in the South. However, one of the stories that's not always known about Rosenwald Schools were those individuals who taught, and they really had a partnership with the Anna T. Jeans Foundation. Anna T. Jeans was a very wealthy woman from Pennsylvania who had set aside funds for the education of Negro children in the South. And Julius Rosenwald became interested as well in terms of building schools. His focus was to provide a certain amount of funding for building schools that were construction worthy. Many children were studying in really structures that were really quite unsafe, and the funding really began throughout the South. Many of the Rosenwald schools were not providing the education, they provided the structure, and the education itself was conducted not exclusively but largely by Jeans teachers named after Anna T. Jeans, who provided really information for our funding for these teachers to go and teach. And of course, there's that partnership between the Jeans teachers and the Rosenwald schools. There is, I know, there's a mapping site, I believe, that's put and I don't know what it's called, I'll have to find that, Rosenwald schools on the map, where the remaining schools in the South that were funded by Rosenwald that still stand, and there's an effort to preserve them. And in fact, probably many of your parents or grandparents attended Rosenwald schools, and you may not know it. Maybe the old Negro high school that closed in 1967 was possibly a Rosenwald school, perhaps. But it's something that there is a movement afoot, a very strong movement afoot in terms of historic preservation of those schools. And most of us have ancestors who attended them.
Dr. Lopez, want to let you have the opportunity to chime in to the discussion if you have anything to say.
Not at the moment. Kind of caught me off guard there. I wasn't expecting you.
I was like, we've been talking, so I'm like, let me let the man speak.
Rosenwald schools pretty well. Somebody mentioned in the chat, they said they all look the same, and that was because you were required to build to the specifications of the Rosenwald Foundation. They gave you plans, and they said, if you're going to build the school, it has to fit these dimensions. And so to get the money, you had to stick to the plan because they wanted to make sure, one of the goals was also to make sure that they had stable structures as opposed to just having, oh, you're just building a school. They wanted to make sure it was a safe school building.
Yeah, they didn't want it to be a clapboard and then the next year it blows down because one little piece of lead like this comes and blows by, right? And all the kids are on the inside and you have that big stove in the middle. It'd be towering inferno in there. So they were probably making sure it's up to code, right? Because now we have building codes. So this was probably one of the early ways, you know, one of the earliest kind of sort of things where it was to a certain standard, had to have a certain type of wood, had to be, you know, had to be put together in a certain way. So thank God for that, right? Thank God for that piece.
Right. This was a wonderful partnership between this Jewish philanthropist and the African American community. This is where you saw how important education meant. It was probably the most important thing that you would find communities wanting to do. I mean, they had the little church schools, but when you had this partner come and offer this support, that community rallied behind this, putting together this institution so that the kids could learn. And it's something that we all need to really be very proud of, what happened in our community and what education meant. And I want to keep stressing that education was so important. That was like the cornerstone of freedom, that you could read and write and you could get that education.
I'd also like to throw in here too, we'd be remiss if we didn't have a conversation, even if not briefly, about the schools that were established by the Freedmen's Bureau. And technically those are historically Black schools. Those were some of the first schools that were started, you know, following the war. And some of them, or a lot of them were, at least in the area where my family's from, were based on plantations, former, you know, plantations that were operated, had enslaved populations. And so if you have not delved into doing research into the Freedmen's Bureau schools, that is definitely a set of records that we highly suggest that you look into. They took censuses of students. They had reports. They told you how much the teachers made. You could have an ancestor who was a teacher at one of the Freedmen's Bureau schools, just like we mentioned earlier about professors and people who taught at some of the historically Black schools and colleges. Same thing with the Freedmen's Bureau schools. And some of those may have stayed around long enough in order for them to become a Rosenwald school. I've seen that happen where a Freedmen's Bureau school became a Rosenwald school and then eventually it closed. So that's definitely something that I think we need to consider as well.
Well, Nika,
go ahead.
I will see your Freedmen's Bureau schools and raise you Black schools that existed pre-Civil War that often also get ignored. I think obviously, you know, you're going to find a lot of those in the North for, you know, runaways and adult night schools and those type of things as well, which that phenomenon, of course, continued after the Civil War. But we often don't talk about the fact that you did have schools for freed and runaway Blacks pre-Civil War, particularly in those abolitionist strongholds. And you may have an ancestor that actually attended one and learned how to read there, or you may have somebody who taught there or was based out of a church or something like that as well. And I think that we would be remiss if we didn't mention that.
I think the challenge to that is to finding documentation or finding where such records may exist. Hopefully in some communities where there is a very strong sense of the African presence in those communities, maybe in places like Rochester, Albany, New York, communities like that, even in Massachusetts and New England, one may find it. And perhaps also just across the border, Canadian border into Windsor, into Ontario. But it's kind of a challenge though, in other communities, maybe in border states, maybe not. Not so sure, but that would be something to learn more about. Good point.
And the last question I have for the panel at large, before we start talking to Dr. Matthews specifically about some of the work that he does at Howard, how can we as a community continue to build and sustain the archival collections at and about these institutions? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're finding is everyone's like, well, where do you find the records? Well, there may not be access to them because there may not be funding, or there may not be space, or, I mean, there's all these logistical concerns. So in addition to supporting these schools, right, financially, which is something that our community, a lot of people have done, but I don't feel like we do it enough. I don't feel like the emphasis is put on that enough in the ways that it was when, you know, as Bernice was talking about, when education was valued in a certain way, where you know, if in order for you to go to just primary school, you had to pay for that. What are the ways that we can, you know, kind of, in addition to asking for the records, showing there's a need, so then that way, you know, maybe grants can be applied for, people can help fundraise or whatever. What else can we do to make sure that these records stay available and that they are financially supported?
Well, I think we just have to start talking about the need to see them and to actually define what it is we want to see. I can certainly appreciate the concern maybe from a university administrator saying, whoa, 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 we've got to protect the privacy of our students. And at the same time, in terms of what it is we should be looking for, what kinds of records actually exist that would be beneficial to a researcher, a family historian, we need to define what it is so then we can ask or make the request properly. And yes, to know what those boundaries are. That's where the dialogue is. And hopefully it's an open dialogue that can be established. So it won't be, you know, a situation where we're calling, asking for information, and sorry, the door is closed, as opposed to, well, what can be opened? What can we find? A school roster between, you know, 1885 and 1925. That would be a joy to have something within that time frame. And of course, as the years pass, then that window could be opened. But again, I think an open dialogue, I think, would be very important. So we can learn, how can we ask and what can we ask for without crossing that line? And maybe that's something Dr. Matthews could address.
Yeah, I was going to ask Dr. Matthews, what can our community do to support maintaining these archives, and, you know, financially or with resources and in terms of access?
Well, it's actually a very simple answer. And you've said it already. We need your money. We need your money. We need your money. As they are cutting budgets and as HBCUs are caught by the STEM bug, you know, archives are not STEM. And, you know, sometimes folks try to slide themselves into that STEM discussion when they really can't.
As an archive, they do?
They try. I've seen it, and I'm like, what are you even talking about?
Wow.
But we basically we need the money. That's
okay.
You need the money.
Okay.
But then how do we cross that? You need the money.
Yes.
You need what? How do we give it? How do we encourage it? How can we start a fundraising campaign? What is it that we can do?
So at oh, sorry, I just saw something that just irks my soul. I'm gonna stop reading that chat. We do have a friends, like at Moreland, we have a friends group that takes donations, and that money goes directly to support Moreland Spingarn. And so I'm sure a lot of other places have something similar where you could donate to a friends group and you know that the money goes directly to the archive and goes to support them and support what they're doing, because that is the beginning of, that's the foundation of everything. You need people and you need the resources to do what you need to really preserve the records, because sometimes records are held back because they're easily damaged and they aren't in a condition where people can see them. And so if you don't have the resources to really make sure that the records could be used and still be preserved, then you won't let them out because you're afraid of the document surviving. Because as an archivist, you're trained to keep. And that's sort of the difference between, you know, how a librarian thinks and how an archivist thinks. A librarian's like, yes, give. And an archivist is like, no, I'm going to keep, you know, to preserve it, and I'm going to keep it. And if it means you can't see it, I'm not going to let you see it because I want to preserve it and you can't look at it. That's where our mind goes. And so when you have the people and you have the resources to really properly preserve things, that then increases access to the material. Like one of the things that is probably will be most helpful for people doing genealogy at Howard is we just started digitizing our commencement program that lists all the graduates. It goes back to the first graduation in 1869. And so we're going through and we're digitizing them, and they'll be searchable on the website, and you can type in your ancestor's name and you'll say, oh, he graduated this year and he's in this graduation program.
Which website is that, Dr. Matthews?
That is our Digital Howard website. It is dh.howard.edu. And if you want to go straight to the Moreland Spingarn records, you will put a /MSRC. But dh.howard.edu, that is our institutional repository. And we have, since I am the head of that department, I always say the royal we, me. I really tried to push for getting what we can put online that isn't copywritten online so that people can search for it and find it and get access to it. That's why we've put a lot of our stuff up so that you can access these student records and you can find your uncle or your grandmother or your grandfather, just by searching the site, you can find them. Like the yearbooks are digitized, those are up. The catalogs are digitized, those are up. We're working on the graduation programs now, so those will be up soon. And so you can do searches to find, your ancestors, to find out about them. And then, we may know of some other things, and we'll say, oh, well, you can also look at this and look at that to find out more about what they've done, what you've sort of started. So
I would imagine too, if you are interested in a college or university that may have something that that they have, but there's no way to digitize it, that would be a great project to work on a fundraise to get the money to be able to digitize those things and put them in an environment where they could be sustained. Not just let's get them online. There has to be some amount of perpetuity to it, to where, because if it becomes a line item in the budget for this department, that's additional money that Dr. Matthews could be spending on an additional student to come in and work versus maintaining this repository or this set of records. So when you do this, when you do fundraising and you think from that frame of mind, think about it from perpetuity. Who's going to sustain this over a certain amount of time? Think about it like a cemetery, right? You have to have perpetual care for a cemetery in order for someone to come and mow the lawn and to maintain the grounds and to come and open up graves and do all that kind of stuff. And we should be thinking about our archival collections in the same way. If we're going to allow people, if we're going to make them open and we want them to be digitized, Howard University, I would imagine, probably maybe working with more of a budget than what some of these, old other schools, right? Like Rust College that's down the road from me.
And Holly Springs, right?
In Holly Springs, Mississippi, right? They may have some amazing stuff in this closet that would be great for researchers, but they don't have the budget to digitize it, or to, once they do, to make it available on an ongoing basis. So when you're looking at fundraising, look at it from that perspective. I have a friend that owns or that's over a women's home where they give women skills that have experienced, being battered and all that kind of stuff. And she had a fundraiser, and they raised enough money to pay the mortgage for 2 years. But her goal is to pay the mortgage off. So don't have a pay the mortgage for 2 years mentality. Have a pay the mortgage off when talking about this type of stuff. Something else. Go ahead, Angela.
No, I had a brief question for Dr. Matthews. Is there an association of African American archivists or HBCU archivists? Is there a professional organization? Do you all meet regularly? Is there something that from which we could learn and maybe visit the website or, hear certain things or read things?
So you do have the Archivists of Color Roundtable in the Society of American Archivists. There are some African American archivists there. There's an information professionals group through the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And so there isn't necessarily a group where we come together, but we all kind of know each other because there's only so many of us in archives anyway. And so we all kind of learn who each other is from various events. And we go, oh, like I just met the archivist from Fisk. Very nice lady. Met the archivist from Spelman. Great lady. And so, you know, we meet at events, we meet around, but there isn't really a concerted effort to say, okay, all the HBCU archivists come together. There is the HBCU Library Alliance, but that's a different entity than, say, all the archivists get together, because there are a lot of HBCUs that don't even have an actual archive.
Right.
There's stuff in the basement or the stuff in the closet.
Correct.
The money or the resources to preserve their records. And so it's like, well, please leave it where it is. Don't touch it because you may destroy it.
In those cases, who would be the curator of the collection or of those boxes?
No one.
That's kind of scary.
Someone who cares about it, or the fact that people don't know about it, and so it's safe because people don't know it's there, which is the scary.
Yeah.
Well, let's start throwing out resources. James, can you hit pretty quickly with some of the links that we have in the resource area, or stuff you wanted to share? Or maybe I'm losing my mind. You're on mute, James. Okay. Okay. It's dead air. All right, moving forward, we'll share some.
Can I just answer one question from the chat room from Shelley?
Sure.
She said, what do you think about teaching real Black history and slavery in public schools? Never gonna happen. Because they do not believe that children have the capacity to really grasp the complexity of real Black history and the history of slavery. They could if they explained it in a certain way, but that takes actual thought and time and effort. And most want to move you through so that you can say you graduated, and they aren't really interested in all of that.
Well, and they're teaching to a test.
Yeah, they're teaching to a standard.
No Child Left Behind moved the trajectory of the educational system because people started teaching to a test and not towards retention and exposure to different things. So yeah, goodness, I wish, but until we stop teaching to tests, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. It's going to have to be supplemented by, people like us who are interested in genealogy and family history, going in with our young people and giving them that education, and not having an expectation that schools do it because they're too busy teaching for a test. We're going to drop some resources in the chat room. James and True are going to do that, but I want to talk to Dr. Matthews for a little bit about some of the work that he's done. What are you currently working on that's exciting at Howard?
So many.
Pick your favorite right now.
I was telling somebody the other day, I really love what I do, and it's like amazing that I get to do it because we're still working on the Hilltop. The ones that are on the website now are from when Zora Neale Hurston started it in February 1924 to May of 1993. So we're working on 93 up to today because we want every issue up and searchable in one place. We're working on the grad programs, the commencement programs from 1869 up through today, so that those are all on the site and searchable. We are, there's something that is right here in my brain, but it's just not coming out because
It's okay. It's okay. I have another question for you. Regardless, maybe it'll come out. We're hoping it'll come out. This year's release of Zora Neale Hurston's book Barcoon has been groundbreaking in our community. Can you talk a little bit about its connections to Howard University and the process it took to get to press?
So the book Barcoon was preserved in Elaine Locke's collection, which we have at Moreland. And I will say, because you saw in certain articles that they said it was languishing in the archives. It was not languishing in the archives. It was well preserved. That's how they could publish it as a book. And, it'd been there for years. Certain people had seen it. The family, they wanted to get it published. And so they worked to get the copy and then publish their work because they knew it was important. It had been there for a while. People had seen it because they knew it was there, but the family finally decided that it was time to put that book out. And so they were really the driving force behind that publication, which I thought was amazing.
It's an awesome book. And you recently published a book, Howard University and the World Wars, Men and Women Serving the Nation. What are some of the records you used to inform that project?
So I used, and now it just left my head, the catalogs, the Howard University catalogs. Was when we typically think about school catalogs, we think, oh, they list the classes and who's teaching, but they actually have articles written in the catalogs about Howard in the war, Howard in World War II. We have letters, a collection of letters from Howard men and women who served in World War II that are on the site. And we transcribed them so that those could all be searchable. And the first student newspaper at Howard, the Howard Journal, which some people think, oh, that's a journal, it's historical. It's actually not. It was a newspaper posted by the students on campus. And they discussed what they wanted to do in the military. And they talked about, one of the things that I thought was interesting was they really talked about their patriotism and how they wanted to support the nation and how they hoped that by doing this work, they would get their equal rights. And so you can read from the students themselves what was happening. And then we also have, which I thought was very interesting because I'm a history nerd, we have the ledgers from our first military department that was founded by Oliver Otis Howard in 1871. And they talk about what the students, their daily lives, it's a daily log of everything that happened while that department existed. And it only stayed until O.O. Howard left to go run the Indian raids, which, a little bit of history that we're like, okay, yeah, that happened, but let's focus on Howard. So, but we have those records and we have photographs. And another interesting thing is Thomas Montgomery Gregory, who was a faculty member at Howard, has a lot of records related to African Americans in World War I because he was very active in World War I. He was at Fort Des Moines, which was the first officers training camp for African American soldiers, founded with the fight of Howard University students. And he served in France during World War I, so we kept those records. Actually, I just want to recommend, and I don't know if you can find it real quick, James, to share with the people, but there's actually a booklet that the Black soldiers wrote, telling their story and telling their history, that is in the pamphlets of Thomas Montgomery Gregory's digital collection. And it's just some amazing things that really let you know how the Black soldiers were thinking about themselves. And so that's what I used to write the book. There was a group called the Prometheans, who they were
still active.
Are they still active?
Someone told me that. I heard that from
Because
someone.
last I heard, I read an article that said that they decided to disband because there were only about 4 or 5 left.
Oh,
So they decided to disband here.
wow.
And so it's just a lot of information. Once we digitized the Hilltop, then I found a lot more information that I didn't even know was there. When I wrote the book, I was like, I went through the Hilltops, but they were on microfilm at that time. And you don't use so much with microfilm unless you have all day to go scrolling through that stuff. But now that it's digitized, I search for things. I'm like, that's amazing. Kind of the shift on World War II, which I thought was very interesting. You can see it clearly in the Hilltop, where in the beginning they were like, oh, this is a war about business, and we should be involved in this war, to, okay, they're learning about what's actually happening in Germany and what's happening in the world. And they're like, wait a minute. Okay, this is actually something that we need to be involved in. And so I just think, we just have there's just some amazing records related to that. So, but, and I know about what we have at Howard, so. I can that.
Yeah, I would say definitely people need to, especially if you have family members that were at a historically Black college university before World War II, and really in some ways potentially before World War I, look into the alumni's fundraising activities to get people to service or to get them trained. I know that I wasn't even looking for it. I found out the Tuskegee alumni in Chicago helped fund the Tuskegee Airmen. I had no clue. And here it was, they raised $100, I forget how many $1,000. It was quite a bit of money. And my grandmother's brother was a part of the fundraising effort to get those pilots trained. So, and that was World War II effort. So look into, Vietnam, same thing, right? You have to, I would say just be kind of well-rounded in your search and not just thinking specifically about degrees in education, but also community stuff and other things that were going on. Is there anything else anybody wants to chime in before we wrap up for the evening?
Yeah, for me, I did want to make sure I mention one resource that is that I posted in the chat there. I think True did as well, about lost colleges, because there are a lot of HBCUs that don't exist anymore. And one of my theories for why they don't is because if you look at the locations of them, some of them are off the beaten path and way out there, by today's standards, and they often get forgotten about. But those schools did leave behind a paper trail as well, and I've found a number of them. I found an ancestor of mine actually was a trustee at a HBCU in Alabama that no longer exists anymore. So just because the school doesn't exist anymore doesn't mean you still shouldn't look for it. And that Lost Colleges site is definitely a site I would recommend you check out.
I have one comment that I would love to make, and it's something that I think we should all remember and be steadfast about. Our HBCUs are valuable, important, and there's something to be said for Black people maintaining Black history. We don't have to send our history to white schools, and we don't have to send our history to white institutions where they make the decision about what gets preserved and they make the decision about what is made public and made accessible. We can preserve our own history, and it would behoove us to preserve our own history. There is a concerted attack on HBCU archives in particular to get the collections, to get the records and take them to these other places where they want to use it as a status symbol. They don't really care about the history. They just want to say, oh, we have this Black collection, we have that Black collection. And they don't necessarily really have the understanding of the true history of these records, of these organizations. But because the perception is that we can't preserve it ourselves, even though we do preserve it ourselves. They say, oh, well, let's send it to a white school because, they have supposedly have all this money. And they aren't doing anything more than what we're doing. It's just that people assume that because they have a larger endowment that they're doing more. But most of the time they aren't. So support your HBCU, support your Black archives, and that's all I have to say. And I had to catch myself because I said, wait a minute. I'm on the tape. I got to watch my mouth.
Yeah, buddy. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and just wrap this up. We were having some complications with the slides, and I don't want to take the panel through trying to do an Ask Mariah in current events, and the slides are not going to work. So we're just gonna go directly into the announcement for next episode, which is taking place Tuesday, October 9th. The episode is our 69th episode of BlackProGen Live. It's called Biology of a Document: From Analysis to Plan. Have you ever found a document document, added the details to your database, and then never looked at it again. We talked about this last week. Get more return on your research investment by learning how to break down and analyze all of the info on the documents you gather and where to proceed in your research going forward. So we're basically going to so what you for an entire hour, and Shelley Murphy better be on the panel and better be able to talk. So don't forget to tune in to episode 69, Biology of a Document from Analysis to Plan. And that's happening next Tuesday, October 9th. We want to spend some time thanking Dr. Matthews for taking time out of his evening to join us and our, lovely crew here at BlackProGen Live. I'll just check the chat to make sure nobody else has anything to say. Panel, you better speak your piece at this point, or you're gonna go down quiet. I don't see you all having a single word to say, and that's okay. The chat room is saying that we need to do 2 Ask Mariahs next time. Lord, I don't know. You guys are not prepared for 2 Ask Mariahs with the type of stuff that we're going to be talking about next week. I don't know if we're going to have time for that, because it's going to be pretty meaty, very meaty episode.
It will be with those documents.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Trudy, you want to sign us on out?
I do. I just can't wait to see you all next week. And I just want to thank you all out there in the chat room, and to the panelists and Dr. Matthews and James. You did a good job back there. So we just want to say thank you, and we'll see you next week. Good night, everyone.